I put it like this: every painful moment I had ever been through in my life, it all made sense on that day of why I went through it, why I had to go through the challenges I went through. And so launch day for me wasn't just a launch of a church. It was a launch of a dream that God put in my heart when I was a child. There are a lot of church planners and pastors who feel like I either have to choose between good systems or the Spirit of God. And I found that you don't have to choose either or, that it's both and. How honest do you want me to be on here? I mean, how much of...
It's a podcast, man. This is where you can be as most real as you want to be.
Okay, okay.
Does faithfulness in waiting ever really pay off? Too often, people with potential launch out without preparation, and that potential is never realized. But in today's episode with Pastor Brian Bullock, we'll find out that God's timing is always right. Welcome to the Believe Again podcast, powered by Parable. I'm your host, Josh Robry, and today you'll get to hear from Brian Bullock, who is the founding pastor of Union Church in Charlotte, who I believe had the largest launch in the history of ARC, especially for a parachute church. They had over 1,600 people attend their launch day service with over 330 salvations. He not only has a great church planting story, but he has a great life story. He had humble beginnings, he remained faithful, he never allowed his talent to lead him, but he allowed his character and sensitivity to God to direct his calling. So I know you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Brian is someone I've been able to spend a lot of time with on his church planting journey, and he's not someone who's just talented on the platform, but when you sit down and listen to him, you realize that this guy is a leadership well that you can draw a lot out of. So I hope you lean in today, because this story is not only going to inspire you, but I know it's going to equip you to lead better as well. Let's get into it. Brian, thank you so much for being on this episode with us.
Man, I'm honored to be here. I'm excited about this opportunity. I have a lot of Josh moments in my launching days. You were a coach to the coaches who are helping to approve us, whether or not we were going to get it or not. And so I'm grateful because we made it through. It had a lot to do with you. So I'm grateful to be here today.
You know, it's my privilege to do that. I remember, being at your assessment and you and Karen going through the tables and me sitting in there. I think I might have made Karen a little nervous a couple times.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. So, my style, I guess, is like, I want to make you prove it. But once you prove it to me, like, I feel like, I would go to the ends of the earth for you. And you guys definitely done that. And not only that, preparing to launch your church, you guys got an incredible amount of momentum, kind of unlike most people get, unlike anyone gets. And what's really been amazing to me is to see that throughout that time, you have always been so quick to deflect and thank other people, put the attention back on other people. And so I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think I recognize that it takes a team, it takes an army to do any of the things that we're doing for God. And I think I know my weaknesses, and I think I know where I can do better. And I know, so it helps me acknowledge others and what they contribute to where we are and where I am. So yeah, I think I'm that's just a part of just my DNA of who I am.
I think that says a lot about your character, who you are, and especially because you guys have had tremendous success. You've reached real rare air when it comes to church planting as far as the launch is concerned. And you've always just, thank you, ARC. Thank you, Josh. You mean so much. You send me, you encourage me. You're sending me encouraging texts. I'm supposed to be encouraging you. Also, fun story. You and I got to hang out in Notre Dame together with some great leaders. Sure, you remember that?
Amazing time. And we still talk. We all still on the same text thread to this day.
Yeah. So we had a great time there. We did a round table and got to watch Notre Dame play football. And again, even there, you were like asking questions. Hey, what do I need to be a better husband? What do I need to be a better pastor and a better leader? And so it's really a thrill to get to talk to you today. And, there's a lot I want to get to, but I want to start off 6 months ago, a little over 6 months ago, maybe 6 months and a couple weeks. You were about to start a brand new church. What was that like, maybe the night before, 2 nights before that launch Sunday?
It was the greatest, most painful, most beautiful, most chaotic thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. I would say the night before we were going to plant, had a lot of family, my mom, my brothers, everyone came in. And I think I was just waiting for an opportunity to get alone with God. I cried like a baby all night. Woke up in the morning, cried some more. And I put it like this: every painful moment I had ever been through in my life, it all made sense on that day of why I went through it, why I had to go through the challenges I went through. And so launch day for me wasn't just a launch of a church. It was a launch of a dream that God put in my heart when I was a child. And it all came together that day. So it was beautifully painful. It was wonderfully chaotic. And today I'll never forget.
Well, you had what I consider to be the largest launch ever in ARC. There's one more person I just kind of have to allude to, because they did have technically more people.
We don't need to.
They had a worldwide ministry that they already had built in the local area. So we're going to call you the largest pure ARC church plant ever. So, talk about that. What happened on launch day, and was that surprising to you? What happened?
So we launched here in Charlotte, North Carolina. We found a high school within the city. The high school auditorium seats 550 people. And so we had planned to do 2 services. And I think my goal, my hope was, if we can hit that 500 number, we're killing. We do that 500 number on our launch day, it will be amazing. Now, we had 200 people on our launch team, which for us was a fairly large launch team. And I was thinking, hey, you're probably going to have 3 times the size of your launch team. So I'm thinking if we launch, if our team had 200, we're probably going to see around 600, which would be absolutely amazing. That day, I'm standing in the front, and one of the people on my team, they walk up to me during the service, and they said, yeah, there's a line of people outside still waiting to get in, and we don't have any more seats. We don't have any more room. We took a hallway where we were doing growth track. We flooded a bunch of people there and made it an overflow. They came back to me and said, we put everyone in overflow. And now we have more people who are still waiting and can't get in. We made a overflow for the overflow. The team came back to me during the service and they said, hey, the school is saying that if the fire marshal comes here today, which he might, he will shut this entire thing down because there's way too many people. And so on our launch day, we had 1,698 people on our launch and a school auditorium that sat 550. And people end up having to leave. We had some people who couldn't get in. And it was just such a crazy day. It was more than what I expected. It was more than what I could have asked for. To this day, I'm still grateful and dumbfounded how it ended up happening for us.
That's wild. And how many people came to Christ?
331 people gave their life to Christ on our launch day. And for me, that number is probably the number that got us the most emotional, and probably the number that got us the most excited, because within that number, it's not just 331 people. These are 331 legacies who their lives will never be the same because of the decision that they made. And I think for us, that was the number that we hold dear to our hearts.
It's just amazing what you've done and what God's done. We know he gets all the credit and glory for that. If a church planner or leader was listening to this, they would probably want to know, how did you get so many people to even find out about your church launching?
The way my pastor says it to me is there's 2 types of momentum. Imagine if you're on a rowboat or a sailboat, there's people in the boat and they're rowing and creating a type of momentum. But then there's just the wind that is just blowing the boat. And for us, I felt like we were rowing as hard as we could. Social media, door hangers, word of mouth, walking in the stores, handing out gift cards, doing everything we can. We are rowing as hard and as fast as we can. And then I also think the wind of God, the favor of God, the acceleration of God through prayer, through fasting, through agreement, through unity, through right motives, was also blowing on what we were doing. I think we had the momentum from our efforts, and it matched the momentum of the Spirit of God. And it just created a perfect storm that ended up being a blessing for our launch.
I love the way that you put that and the way that you phrase that up. I think about the fact that any strategy can work to a certain degree, but it's up to you to bring the spiritual depth, the hunger for God and the character to that. When I look at you and your story, like what you brought this deep spiritual dynamic to a great plan, and you were committed to both of those things, and it paid off.
100%. Sometimes the dichotomy is, hey, what did you guys do? And I can give you strategy. But then there's also, hey, what did you guys do? Some of what we did, what you did, and we didn't get the same result, because some of that was also spirit. There are a lot of church planners and pastors who feel like I either have to choose between good systems or the Spirit of God. And I found that you don't have to choose either or, that it's both and, that we're going to have systems and strategy and structure, and we're going to use it to the best of our ability, but we're also going to rely on the spontaneous, powerful Spirit of God to move us forward. If you have a strong right hand and a strong left hand, you can knock something out that's in your way.
And then nice little headbutt every now and then, that can be, I don't know what that is, but okay. So why did you choose Charlotte?
Man, that's so interesting. How honest do you want me to be on here? I mean, how much of
it's a podcast, man? This is where you can be as most real as you want to be.
Okay. So here's the real deal. Initially, we knew that we wanted to plant a church. Initially, I had said, we're going to go to Nashville. I had visited Nashville. While I was in Nashville, I felt like I had a God moment. I was like, man, Nashville is a city. We were making all of our plans to plant there. What ended up happening is I am standing at a stage inside of one of our churches, one of our locations or campuses at Union Church in Maryland. And I'm standing at the stage during 21 days of prayer. I hear the Lord say to me, why not Charlotte? Now, Josh, I had always said I would never plant a church in Charlotte. People have come to me and they said, man, you should plant a church in Charlotte. I said, I'll never plant a church in Charlotte. And they'd say, why wouldn't you plant a church in Charlotte? I said, they got a pretty serious church there already. And I think they're doing pretty good. And I used to say, and I'm just being honest, I used to say, you got to be a fool to plant your church in Charlotte. They're good. They've got the church of churches there already, and they're fine. But the Lord said something to me when he said, why not Charlotte? He brought me back to a scripture where Jesus says, my sheep hear my voice, and another they will not follow. And what the Lord was saying to me is, hey, there are people in Charlotte that are connected to your voice, and they won't truly walk into their purpose until you truly walk in yours. And for me, it was a moment where the Lord was saying, yeah, I know I have churches there, but there are people that are specifically connected to what I put on the inside of you. And that day at that stage, I told the Lord that I would plant a church in Charlotte. And regardless of what I was thinking about the city, we had never been to Charlotte, never lived in Charlotte. I visited Charlotte one time in my life. When I moved here, I realized something, that as great as the churches here are, and as great as the work that they're doing, there is still not enough churches in this city to meet the need of all the people who are moving here. And God allowing us to be here, it is literally because there is a harvest of people that are moving to this region, to this area. And we get to be a part of the churches in this area that are going to feed them spiritually and that are going to introduce them to the Lord. And I'm glad that we made that decision.
Man, that's amazing. So supernatural. It's hard to turn down Nashville, and you guys are obedient. It definitely paid off. Hey, this is Josh here with Greg Daly from Parable. And Greg, at Parable, you like to say that you help pastors put every dollar on mission to tell the story of his kingdom. What does that mean to you?
Every church gets started because they're on a mission towards something. And a pastor usually is really good at sharing that story of that church's mission and inviting others into it. So that's the head and the heart. I think there's another part to that mission is it's got to be funded in some way. And oftentimes a budget is kind of a necessary evil, or it's part of even the curse. Maybe as God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden, maybe gave them a budget. But we believe budgets are just a tool to help you carry out your mission. And if you can actually have your budget supporting the story your church is telling, it allows you to go farther, faster, and do more in the kingdom.
That's hilarious that God would punish us with a budget. I know a lot of pastors feel that way about their budget and finances, but parable can help you out. That's where Greg and his team comes in to really lift that burden off of you so that you can tell a better story for your church and help bring the message of God's kingdom to your community. If you're interested in finding out more about Parable, go to liveyourparable.com, click the Let's Chat button, and enter in the code BELIEVEAGAIN to get 25% off your onboarding services. I'm so happy to have Live Design Group as a sponsor for the Believe Again podcast. Live Design Group is an architectural and interior design firm working with growing organizations who are focused on creating places that bring people together. Their highly interactive live design process lets you explore your options as the design evolves in real time. Their process enables a deeper understanding of every decision, combining their experience with your DNA to achieve your vision. To Live Design Group, success is when the building reflects you, not the architect. To find out more about Live Design Group, email Craig at livedesigngroup.com. We'll get back to the conversation in just a moment, but before we do, I want to tell you about a new tool that's helping more new people come to church for the first time than anything I've ever seen before. It's called Visit Planner. And Visit Planner uses targeted digital advertisement and powerful engagement software to help introduce your church to new people. You can find out more by scheduling a demo at visitplanner.church and use the code VP20 to get 20% off your first month. That's V as in visit, P as in planner, 20 to get 20% off your first month. Now back to the show. I want to go back even further a little bit. And I know you felt called into ministry at a young age. Where are you from and what was it like growing up in your home?
I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. And if you want to know what part of Boston, Massachusetts I'm from, all you got to do is think Bobby Brown, New Edition. That's the part of Boston I was raised in. I was raised by a single mom, absent dad. My dad struggled with a drug addiction that pretty much nearly broke up my family. We grew up on food stamps, government assistance, growing up in what they call the projects. My mom didn't graduate from high school, was working on a GED when I was kind of young. And so we grew up around all the things that you would think you would see within the inner city of violence and gangs and all that stuff. But my mom always took us to church. And at my church, I went to a small Baptist church where my grandfather wasn't the pastor, but he was a preacher in the church. And my grandfather was really much about legacy. He was really much about, you're going to know God. If you're going to be a Bullock, you're going to know the Lord. It was one of those times where they made you say yes to God. They made you read a Bible. They weren't taking no for an answer, didn't care about your feelings at all. And so my grandfather is the one who introduced me to God at a young age. I preached my first sermon when I was 7 years old. I got ordained as a minister when I was 18. I used to direct the choir. I used to teach Bible classes. And so even though I had all this chaos in my home, when I was at church, I was in purpose. When I was at church, I got to meet with God. Some kids, when they experience difficulty in their home, they find a clubhouse or a secret place where they can go to for shelter and safety. And for me, it was a local church. And so when we talk about that 331 who got saved on our launch day, I'm always thinking about, man, one of those 331 is a version of me. There's a kid there whose home life is chaotic and crazy, but today they found a local church that can be their safe place. So that's what childhood was like for me. It doesn't necessarily matter how you start, it matters how you finish, and we're finishing strong.
I also grew up with a single mom. My mom was single most of my childhood. Her and my dad divorced when I was 2 years old, and we were brought to church too, but it's a little bit different than your situation. My mom actually would drop me off at church on Sunday. And then my grandfather would come pick me up later in the morning. And so she got some free babysitting, which, God will use whatever he needs to, right? To get a hold of somebody. And Lord knows my mom needed that break, but I began going to that church. And then my dad, I grew up in Mississippi, he lived in Louisiana. He gave his heart to the Lord around the time I was in junior high. That impacted me. And so I started leaning in a little bit more at church. And just like you, church became that safe place for me, because there's a lot of back and forth in our custody battle for me and my brother. It literally went on from the time I was 2 until the time I was 18 years old. But I would go to church. And that's why I believe in the local church. So I believe that church can be a force for good and make an eternal difference in people's lives. So I'm glad that we can kind of share similar heritage there. Brian, tell me a little bit about feeling the call to ministry.
Yeah, ministry was one of those things that picked me before I picked it. I was always preaching before I knew what it was. Before I was preaching in my room to toys. I had an upside down hairbrush, and I am preaching to teddy bears and to action figures. And I am gathering my brothers, and I am doing communion. I am breaking saltine crackers with the Kool-Aid, and I am pretending that I am doing the communion thing for them. So it was something that was in me when I was born. At the middle school that I was at, they had a dress for career day, dress up your career. And I said, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to go be an attorney. And so I put on this suit and I grabbed a briefcase and I walked into my school for career day. And as soon as I walked in, they said, everybody, look, the preacher's here. And I said, no, I'm an attorney. And they said, no, you look like a preacher. I'm like, no, I got a briefcase. What preacher do you know carries a briefcase? No, you're like a pastor to me, So it was one of those things that wasn't an option for me. When I was in high school, I was a part of an R&B group. I was in a boy band, and the group was called Upon Request. Come on now. We was
great name.
We was smooth. And I remember one day in high school, the Lord spoke to me and said that that's my voice and that is my gift, and I need you to use it for the kingdom. We were working on some record deals, and we were talking about, getting signed and all that stuff. And I remember having to go to them and say, hey guys, there's a call of God on my life. Since high school, I just said yes to the Lord. For some people, ministry is a hobby. For some people, ministry is a means to an income. For some people, ministry is a means to a platform. For me, ministry was survival. Ministry is purpose. It is the most fulfilling thing I could ever do in my life. And it's something that I signed up for before I thought of becoming or doing anything else. And it's been the greatest adventure of my life.
Speaking of adventure, you mentioned this R&B group, and I know music is a big part of who you are. How did it come about where you started leading worship, and what does that ministry look like for you?
Starts with my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather's named Singing Walter. He had 27 children, and my grandfather is the youngest of 27. And my grandfather went on to have 14 kids. And his older brother, who was right above him, also had 14 kids. And his 2 older sisters had 14 kids. And they all moved from North Carolina to Boston. And all of the grandkids and kids are singers, preachers, musicians. And my grandfather was part of a quartet group called the Bullock Brothers. And so I get up there and I'm singing with the quartet group. From there, I remember one day finding out about worship music. I had only known traditional quartet gospel music. When I discovered worship music, that there was music that was vertical, that was literally me talking to God and expressing the thoughts of my heart to the Lord, man, it blew my mind. I would sit in my room all day and start singing these songs to the Lord. I'm coming back to the heart of worship.
Oh my goodness.
Shout to the Lord, all the earth, let us sing. I mean, I'm blown away by these songs. And from there, I realized that when you're an R&B singer, your job is to get people on their feet, make people scream, make people yell, let's go. And I realized that the gift that I had that was able to make people rise and scream and in a secular setting, that when I gave that gift to God, it allowed people to usher into his presence and to shout and to scream his name. And so for me, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I loved it. I spent most of my life wondering if I was a preacher who sings or a singer who preaches. And I think today I know that I am a preacher who just happens to sing.
Oh, there you go. Well, I'm glad you got that figured out. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm good enough to preach, and we know I'm not good enough to sing. So good for you that you have to deal with that struggle. Yeah, that's awesome.
You're a leader. You're a leader of leaders, man. You can do it. You can do it all, though.
Yeah, I got some different gifts. I'd love to hear about how your journey in ministry, like, where these different speaking and worship leading, like where did that take you before planning a church?
So ultimately, I leave the Baptist church that I grew up in. I joined the largest church in my city at the time called Jubilee Christian Church in Boston, Massachusetts, which had like a membership of like 75, 100 people. And I ended up going there and became a worship leader and a youth pastor. Ended up being a youth pastor for 6 years.
Which, I think that's important, 6 years being a youth pastor, and you didn't think, and you grew that youth ministry, right? To I think 400 students, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
And you didn't think, oh, I'm gonna go plant a church after that. Talk about like maybe how important those 6 years were, and how much Mike's pastries you ate during that time.
How you know about Mike's pastries?
Man, believe it or not, my first day on the job at ARC was in Boston, Massachusetts.
Really?
Yeah, we flew in there for a training. They wanted me to go to the training right away so that I could, hit the ground running when I got here. And I'm like walking around the city the night before, and I'm seeing these white boxes with this blue and white string. And I was like, whatever that stuff is, it's got to be good because everyone's carrying it. And so I just stopped someone. I was like, what is that? And like, these are cannolis from Mike's Pastries. Absolutely. And I was like, where is that? There's like, it's in the Little Italy over here, the North End. And so I'm like, all right, I'm heading there right now. And so anytime I get to go there, I go to Mike's Pastry. I didn't know that it was the staple that it is. And
absolutely,
kind of like a big deal. Yeah. Talk about that season, how it prepared you in ways maybe you didn't even realize.
So here's the thing. The truth is, I probably didn't steward that season as well as I had liked.
That's such a spiritual way of saying that too.
I'll tell you what happened. I love being a youth pastor. I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I love chasing kids. I love showing up to the schools. I loved, breaking up all the little young couples. I loved it all. It was great. And then I started growing in my preaching gift. It's funny, Josh, because I don't think everyone starts out that way, right? For me, I was totally happy serving my pastor, serving the vision, serving the church. But what happens is as you grow in ministry, people start saying things to you. And at first you don't notice that it's getting to you, but after a while it starts getting to you. You'll preach a sermon and someone will come to you and they'll say, man, I love when pastor preach, but when you preach, it just moves the room. And you're like, oh, thank you so much. Oh man, pastor has a word, but when your word be the word that changes my life, and you're just kind of like, thank you. But after a while, you start thinking, wait a minute, I think I got a word. I think I should be doing this. I think I should be preaching. I would have people come to me and they would say, man, if you ever started a church, man, you start a church, I'm there. I'm going to be the number one person with you, man. And you're starting to hear this. It was in a time where we used to sell sermon CDs. I would preach and we had a little bookstore and there would be a line, of people buying my sermon CDs, and everyone else who had preached before me, their CDs would still be up there and mine's flying off the rack. And I'm thinking, yeah, you know what I mean? I think I'm good at this. At some point, I did have the desire of, man, maybe I should go plant. And so I went and walked in to my pastor's office and said, hey, I need to talk to you. And that day I told him, hey, I feel called to plant a church. And yeah, I'm going to plant it here in the city that you hired me in for last. This is going to be amazing. And God's going to do something great. And let's just say it wasn't the most pleasant conversation in the world. I probably had unknowingly resigned that day and didn't realize it. And so I was blessed to have good mentors in my life, that when I was kind of making these decisions, I had mentors who came in, sat me down and said, hey, let's not do it this way, and stopped me from making a huge mistake. Because one, I would have split that church. Number two, all the people that said they were coming with me were not going to. And then the ones who did were going to be about as toxic as anything you could find. And then it was going to stop me and prevent me from being able to have a relationship with the pastor that I currently have, that is so blessed, that is so anointed, that's so full of grace. So rather than plant a church, I ended up saying, hey, let me spend some more time preparing myself and getting myself ready for that season. And so I ended up moving from Boston to Denver, Colorado. That kind of led to the next season of my life.
In that season, you were a worship pastor, and eventually you would go on to be an evangelist, and you would kind of go out there and maybe refine and discover more of that preaching voice. And that was probably a big step for you. I just wonder, through all these different transitions, through all these steps, these big responsibilities that you're putting on yourself, was there ever a point where you reached maybe a place approaching burnout?
The fatigue was carrying a dream and not knowing when or how this dream would come to pass, and feeling like I missed out on a season, and feeling like maybe I should have done it another way, or feeling like it's taking too long. The journey is what created the burnout. I loved preaching. I loved worshiping. I loved that stuff. It was the nights where my wife and I are living out of our suitcase because we know that we are at a church, but this is not going to be the last church or the last city that we're living in. And so when I said earlier that when I drove up to that launch day, everything I had been through up to that point has now made sense, because I spent majority of my time as an evangelist wondering if I'm missing out on a season, and wondering if all the stuff God said is going to do is going to happen, to now realizing that I was right on time. I hadn't missed a thing, that God had Charlotte literally waiting for me, that God had a Union Church waiting for me, and that every step of the process was another step of development for my character, another step of development for my marriage, another step of development for my mind and my finances. And I think many people abort the process too soon because they're trying to keep up with an unreasonable timeline that they gave themselves, instead of allowing God to walk them through a season long enough for them to be able to get everything that God intended for them to have. And so I think that part of what I'm experiencing now is a result of being able to endure those hard moments.
Man, that's such a great place for us to land. Brian, I want to give you the last word. Is there anything else you want to add or leave the viewers and listeners with before we wrap up?
I just want to talk to people who may feel like they're in a hidden season. They may feel like God don't see them. They may feel like people don't see them or don't notice them. I just want to encourage you that what you are doing in private, God is going to reward in public. And you may be hidden now, but when God exalts you after you walk through your humility season, man, he's going to blow your mind, and you're going to experience purpose on a level like you've never experienced before. So embrace being hidden, because your moment and your time is going to come.
What a great message to end with. Thank you again for being with us, Brian. I'd like to thank my guest, Pastor Brian Bullock, for being with me today. You can find out more about him online at brianmbullock.com. And also you can follow him on Instagram at Brian M. Bullock as well. I'd also like to thank our title sponsor, Parable, who offers bookkeeping, accounting, and strategic services to churches. They help you with your finances so you can focus on people. You can find out more about them at liveyourparable.com. I also want to thank our headline sponsor, which is Live Design Group. Live Design Group offers architectural and interior design services. You can find out more about them at livedesigngroup.com. I also want to thank Isaiah Duncan and Nicole Atkinson for helping us produce these episodes. You can find out more about Nicole at her own podcast, the Good Mood Tuesday podcast. And finally, I'd like to thank Yellow Box, who designed the Believe Again brand and built the believeagain.co website. You can find out more about Yellow Box at yellowbox.co.
Be sure to keep the ground in sight.
And one more thing, over the past couple years, pastors have begun reaching out to me to ask for my coaching help. This is not something I've ever promoted or sought to do, but after helping several churches, I'm ready to help you as well. What makes what I offer a little bit different is I'm not going to put you on a group conference call, and I'm not just going to hand you over to some curriculum. I'm going to meet with you once a week, face-to-face, to talk through your problems and possible solutions. So if you're a small church that's looking to revitalize or relaunch, or you're just a leader who wants to apply some church planting principles to your church and your team, perhaps I can help. To find out more, just email me, josh@believeagain.co, and see if we're fit to work together. Hopefully I can help you out. Again, thank you for being with me today, and I can't wait for you to join us next time.